I was working at the desk one night when I was interrupted by a small voice from just below the rim. "Excuse me." I looked up from the reports I'd been doing, but I couldn't see anyone. I almost laughed as I wondered if the ghosts had started haunting my desk in the hope of making it into the book. I had just finished writing up an account of what had happened in room 301 the day before, and it had excited a new interest in the project. Before meeting Marcus and Glimmer and, of course, Grandpa, it had sometimes seemed like I was cataloging the weirdness in the hospital all by myself. More than that, it seemed like it was me against them most of the time. And that's lonely work. My friends were interested, but it was clear that they were more interested in the weirdness stopping so that they could go about their work without having to worry about it. Now, I didn't just have friends, but allies, and that made me feel a little better. "Hey, mister, excuse me," the voice came again, and I looked back up as I tried to find the source. Looking over the edge of the desk, thinking it might be a kid, I saw a little girl looking at me from beside the tall reception desk. She couldn't have been older than 4 or 5, and her sandy brown hair was cut in a short, messy page boy. She was wearing a hospital gown, her bare feet bouncing a little as she smiled at me, and her arms were crossed over her chest. She was the picture of mischievous glee, and she damn well knew it. "What you doing?" she asked, her bright green eyes sparkling. Working on reports. What about you? Shouldn't you be in your room, kiddo?" She walked around the desk, utterly unimpressed with me, and flopped down in the chair I usually saved for my friends when they came to hang out on the break. "All the other kids are asleep, but I'm not tired. Nurse Gunny keeps telling me to go to sleep and be quiet, so I snuck out to see what the rest of the hospital was doing." "So, what are you doing?" I started to show her my spreadsheet that I was making, the one with all the doctor schedules that I needed to put together for tomorrow, but I guess I had bumped the mouse because my book had come up, and she made an interesting noise as she read the title. The kid was advanced, I suppose, but that was nothing new. Kids these days were so much more advanced than I had been when I was that age, and it never failed to make me feel like I was pushing 1,000,000. "Ooh, are you writing ghost stories?" she asked, mystified. "Kinda," I said, clicking back over to the spreadsheet as I started working on the last few columns. "It's more like I'm collecting ghost stories for a book I'm writing." "What do you mean, collecting?" she asked, my eyes flicking back and forth as I kept plugging in the data. "Ghost stories aren't like baseball cards or troll dolls." "That's true," I said, hitting save as I pulled up my email so I could send it to my supervisor. "This is more like a history book. I take old stories and I add them to my book so the people who haven't heard them can read them." "Oh, that makes sense," she said, looking over my shoulder as I closed the spreadsheet and brought my book back up. "Lots of people like scary stories. What kind of stories do you like?" "Well," I hedged, deciding it couldn't hurt to tell her about the hospital a little, "these stories are all about the ghosts in the hospital." Her mouth dropped open in surprise. "No way! There are ghosts in the hospital?" I chuckled. This kid had to be one of the few people in town that didn't know. I probably shouldn't say anything. It might not be responsible to tell a kid about all the weird stuff here. "Hey," she said, puffing out her chest a little, "I'm not just some kid. I'm 6. I can handle scary stuff." I did laugh then. "My mistake, miss. Well, since you're so grown up and mature, I guess you've heard about the ghost lady in the lobby." She shook her head. "No, I didn't know there was a ghost lady there." I was done with my work for a while, so I decided I had some time to tell her about it. I spent a few minutes regaling her with the story of the lobby jumper, sanitizing it a bit for her delicate ears. She was enthralled, leaning forward a little as she swung her legs ever so slightly. When I finished, she mouthed, "Wow." and sat back. "But that's so sad," she added. "I wish she'd been able to keep her baby." "Me too, kid. But life doesn't always work out that way." "Yeah, that's true," she said. "Tell me another one, please." I thought about it and decided I probably had time for another story. "Have you ever heard of Shaky Leg Mary?" She shook her head, so I told her about that one too. I added Carl's part so it would be extra spooky, and she sat frozen to the spot as her face registered everything from apprehension to terror. It was clear that she didn't really like these stories, but she was interested in them in the same way that lots of little kids are. Little kids, especially elementary school kids, seem to really love spooky stories, and though the memory is likely to keep them up at night, they always ask for another one as soon as you're done. I had just finished my story, the little girl shivering in her chair, when the phone rang. I told her to hold on and picked it up to find Carl on the other end. "Hey, can you keep an eye out for a missing kid?" I glanced over at the little girl and grinned. Missing kiddo, huh?" She shook her head, waving her hands in negation, as Carl told me about a little girl who had slipped out of the unit. The nurses hadn't even noticed she was gone until now, and they really hoped that she hadn't made it outside. They don't think she did. They're pretty sure she's just hiding on the second floor, but if you see her, let somebody know, okay? The little girl put her hands together as if praying and begging me not to tell on her, and I just snorted to myself. "Can do, Carl. I'll let you know if I see anything." "Thanks, buddy," he said, and hung up. I put the phone back in the cradle and looked down at my little visitor. "Looks like you've been missed. I think you should probably head back to bed, kiddo." "No," she begged. "No, not yet. Please, I'm not ready for bed yet." "Come on, kid. If they find you hanging around with me, then we could both be in a lot of trouble." Her face let me know that she was thinking rapidly, trying to find something that would keep her here longer. What if I told you a ghost story? Something you could add to your book?" "I thought you said you didn't know about any ghosts in the hospital," I said, intrigued but still hesitant about getting yelled at by Carl. No, not a ghost story about this place. One about another place, a place where I live. I'll tell you the story of Hattie Dyer if you let me stay a little longer." I'd never heard that one, and I was curious enough to agree. The little girl grinned, showing me a couple of missing teeth as she spread out her hospital gown like a skirt. Her arms looked a little red now that I was looking at them, and I hoped she didn't have something catching. It was more like a sunburn than anything, though, and as she began, I thought again that she sounded like she was much older than 6. She spoke like a kid who had grown up quick, and I commiserated, remembering what that had been like. "It was a long, long time ago, back in the 70s, I think, and Hattie and her friends were out playing in the woods. They'd been playing hide and seek when a sudden rainstorm came. The sky got dark and the rain came down and the lightning started cracking across the sky. That sent them running for home. They were pretty far into the woods, though, and they were afraid of getting hit by lightning. So, as they ran through the woods, looking for somewhere dry to stay until the storm was over, they came across an old house out in the forest. It was just an old house, abandoned and just itching to be explored, and they ran inside after checking to make sure that there was no sign of anyone inside. The door was gone and the lights didn't work, but after exploring, they didn't find anyone hiding, and they felt safe enough to stay there until the storm was over. They decided to keep playing hide and seek to pass the time, and Hattie went to find a spot as one of her friends started counting. She was hiding in a closet near the back of the house where a gigantic lightning strike hit nearby, shaking the house like a bomb. Hattie didn't move, she just kept hiding until she started to smell smoke. She didn't think much of it until there was another crash and she heard her friends yelling her name. The smoke was getting thicker, choking her, and she opened the door to find that the lightning had set a tree on fire. She tried to get out, but the smoke was too thick, and she coughed and coughed as she moved through the dark house, utterly lost. Finally, she lay down and fell asleep, the fire chewing through the house before it finally collapsed. They say that if you go to the spot where the house used to be, Hattie can be heard coughing and calling for help to this very day. And that is the sad story of Hattie Dyer. I had to admit, that was a pretty good story. I opened my mouth to tell her so, but I perked up my ears when I heard the jingle of keys coming up the hallway. It was Carl. I could have picked Carl's keys out of a lineup. And I turned to the girl to tell her she might want to head out. That sounds like Carl from security. You better go hide if you don't. But when I turned back to look at her, she was gone. The chair moved a little, making me think that she had been there, but there was no sign of her. Carl came around the corner, keys jingling and a whistle preceding him, and told me that if I wanted to break, then I better go get one. I gotta head upstairs anyway to take a look around for that little girl, so be quick tonight, alright? I told him I would, and as I walked to the cafeteria, I kept an eye out for the kid. She couldn't have gotten far, not in a couple of seconds, and I kept expecting to see her peek around a corner and ask me if the coast was clear. I didn't see her for the rest of the night, and when 6 o'clock rolled around, I still couldn't get the kid off my mind. Carl had called me around 4 to tell me that they had found her, but I kind of wanted to ask her about the story she had told me, too. It had been a good one, and if it was true, I absolutely wanted to add it to my book. So I went up to the second floor and talked to the nurse at the Women and Children's Center about the missing girl. "Oh, Terry," she said, laughing. "Yeah, she escapes ever so often. She's in and out a lot, so the nurses usually know where to find her." "Well, she made it downstairs last night and found me," I said. The nurse seemed surprised. "Are you sure? I mean, how many little girls with short brown hair went missing last night?" I asked jokingly. The nurse looked startled. "Short brown hair? Terry Weiss is a ginger. She's so pale, she scared the tech who found her half to death. He said she looked like a little ghost." That took me back. "I guess you had 2 kids slip off last night then. She came down and wanted ghost stories, but she told me a story I was hoping she could elaborate on. It was about Hattie Dyer and a fire and the..." But I was cut off when an older nurse stuck her head around the corner. She looked ready for retirement, the coffee in her hand shaking just a little, but her eyes looked as inquisitive as the girl's had been. She told the nurse I'd been talking to that it was time to check room 5 again and make sure the little escape artist hadn't slipped off. And once she was gone, the older nurse fixed me with a hard look. "Where did you hear that name, young man?" "The little girl told me, the one who showed up at my booth last night." "What did she look like?" I described her, and the nurse sucked in a breath anxiously. "She told you about Hattie Dyer?" "Yeah, she said she burned up in a fire." "Close," the nurse croaked, taking the seat that had been vacated by the other. "But not quite. Hattie Dyer had just turned 6 when she and her friends were playing in an old house on the outskirts of Cashmere. There was a terrible lightning storm, and the kids ran inside to take refuge. The lightning hit a tree nearby, and the tree lit ablaze and fell onto the house. Hattie Dyer almost died of smoke inhalation, but her friends braved the blaze to save her. She was burned pretty bad, but they managed to carry her to a nearby house so the paramedics could come and get her. She had slipped into a coma by then, and she died in the Old Women and Children's Center on 3 North. She never woke up, just slipped off one night from her injuries. People have reported seeing her before, but she isn't as well known as some of the other spirits here. She could be mistaken for a patient or a normal little girl, but poor old Hattie is stuck here, just like the rest of them." I was speechless, but When I found my voice again, I thanked her for telling me. Hattie will definitely be going into my book. It isn't often you get a ghost story from a real ghost. You're still here. Thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague here. Always a pleasure to see all my new and old viewers coming by for another one of my spooky tales. If you'd like to support the show, you can always take part in one of our channel offers through Fume or Aura, or you can just click on another video when they come up. I'd really appreciate it. For our newer viewers, we also have lots of playlists and other things if you'd like to get caught up. I know some of my series have been going on for quite a while. If you'd like to get my latest book, there's a link down below that'll take you to my Amazon page. Towesey Homestead just came out, so if that's something you'd like to get your hands on, go ahead and have a look down there. If you'd like a signed copy, you can go ahead and email me from my email address on the site, and I'll get with you about shipping information and ship you a signed copy. If you'd like to support the channel in a more monetary fashion, we also have membership through YouTube, and we've got a Patreon that you can get the information for in the description. We have lots of tiers and everything to suit your needs. Patrons that support on the $10 tier, that's our Ghostly Reader tier, get a book anytime I write one, signed and on their doorstep. As you may have noticed, there's a list of patrons and members on the screen, and I'd like to personally thank every one of them for taking a hand in the future of this channel. Well, that's enough for tonight. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.